Okay, oh, that was too quick. So yeah, I want to talk to you about organizing software architecture in your company. So I want to share two experiences with you. I'm going to share my experience of organizing architecture in two different ways and two different contexts, and then some reflections on it. So we're going to stay a bit technical, but we're also going to move into sort of a more organizational space. So, hey, software architecture, you're going to say, why should I care about software architecture? I'm an engineering manager, I'm a leader, I don't care, I'm not an architect. Well, you should, right? So yesterday, for example, I think Conway's Law has been mentioned a couple of times. Oh, I see people nodding here, right? Conway's Law roughly says, whatever systems you build, the structure of your organization is going to be reflected in the systems you build. Right, so the system, I don't remember the exact wording. I also prefer a different one. That's why I chose this one, because Conway's Law to me is a bit unidirectional. Right? It says there's your organizational structure and the architecture is kind of a product from that. That's what we reflected there. But once we have some architecture, this is also a constraint. Right? So maybe you can do, maybe doing some organizational changes will not have the effect you want to because your architecture doesn't allow you to leverage that. A typical example, I think, has been brought up a lot. Monolith, you have a sort of big ball of mud, you want to scale your organization, you want to add more teams, and you realize, okay, we don't really get faster, because now you need so much collaboration, so much coordination between the teams. You have these lockstep releases of your big monolith, that the teams can't really deliver anything on their own. So having the wrong architecture, if you will, if you have an architecture that's, or you could have an architecture that prevents you from scaling. Not even talking about technical here, but really focusing on the organizational part. You need an architecture, if you want to grow and scale, of course you need an architecture that supports that. Or another way of looking at that is flow, right? Feature flow. You want to be in a position where you can bring things to market quickly, right? From idea to production, fast. Ideally this happens because the whole change that's needed for this, all this can be handled within one team with very little coordination, collaboration needed with other teams. So again, your architecture needs to allow this, right? So neglecting architecture and not thinking about also your technical architecture will prevent you from being able to implement a certain social architecture in your teams and your structures, right? So when we talk about architecture, we're really talking about the whole, the technical part and the organizational part, or sort of the socio-technical system of software development, if you will. So how do we make architecture decisions in our organization? Hey, easy. It's super important, architecture. So we just get some super smart people, call them architects, and now every decision is going to be made by them, right? So if the software development teams need to agree on something, they need to develop something new, they want to introduce some new tech, they just go to the architects and say, hey, we need an architectural decision here. Can you please do this decision for us? And then we know we're on the safe side. Super. No. This is a joke, right? We're not going to work like this. We don't want to work like this. First of all, this is completely against the idea of flow. We just introduced a new dependency. Right now, the development team is dependent on some, ivory tower architect. And also, in reality, we just heard in, well, two talks before, top minds are looking for top challenges, right? So a modern senior developer, they won't even accept that, right? Why would they? Like, if I'm a developer, individual contributor, and I have this task, but I have to produce the code, I have to maintain it, I probably have to do on-call for it. My performance is going to be evaluated based on it. So I have somebody else tell me how to do it? No, of course not. I'm going to make the decisions, right? Having a dedicated architect who's not coding, who's outside of the team, Charity Major said that's a bullshit role. And I've been an architect, I've had this title, and I don't disagree with the statement. I think that is the case. Well, no offense, but if you're an architect, maybe you handle it differently. I don't want to offend anyone. No. So what we really want is we want the people in the teams to make the decisions. We want empowered teams, right? So they need to be autonomous and aligned. Autonomous, so autonomous is the easy bit, right? The y-axis. Just give them all the freedom. Give them the freedom to make their own decisions. Yay, autonomy. But also, of course, we want to make sure that they have the necessary context. Right? We probably have some architecture strategy or some decisions they make might affect other teams, might affect the overall system. So we need a certain degree of alignment and sort of common understanding. So that's the challenge. As I said, y-axis is easy, just give them the freedom. But how do we deal with these x-axis? That's right? That's the x. How can we create this alignment? So I tried 2 different approaches in 2 different companies. Let's look at the first one. We call it the architecture guild. I put it in quotes because we use the term guild very liberally here. I think when other people, if somebody from Spotify talks about a guild, that might be a slightly different thing. Anyway, we call it guild, so I'm using the term here. What's the context? It's a rather young company in the sense of the people who started it and also the technical people who started building the whole thing, they're still on board. Right? They started with a strong vision, with a strong architecture vision as well. We still have this. Now the task, what we want to achieve, or the context, is mostly about conserving. If you have this, if you have a group of sort of early contributors that have a strong vision, and now you want to grow, you want to keep this culture and you want to keep this vision. You have to make sure that people that are newly onboarded, when you grow the organization, that this doesn't get lost, because it might not be codified well, right? It might be just in the heads of people or in the code, but maybe the principles haven't been sort of formulated nicely. So when we do this, let me take this up here. Of course, we start with the sort of why. What do we want to achieve? What are the outcomes we want to see if we put this in place? So, as I said, we have a strong architectural vision. It might not be codified well. So one of the goals is to make sure this understanding, a shared understanding, is created, to take this to the teams, to educate people, to coach people. Also, of course, we want some sort of peer exchange. We want people to learn and grow as well, right? Mastery is an important part of this. So provide a forum for people to discuss their architectural challenges, get input from peers, get feedback. Create some docs around it as well, right? Maybe we have to put the principles in a form that is easily teachable and conceivable. So creating artifacts, some cookbooks maybe, some easy to, like, a small number of principles you can put on a poster, things like this. And promote this, right? Promote this in the organization. Again, I said this in the forum to discuss, the mastery part, right? Also, we want to give people the opportunity to get better at architecture, right? It's not only about sort of getting a buy-in from your peers on decisions, it's also about learning from them, right? So if you want to organize architecture, there's an important aspect of this. And then the kind of strategic part. When you leave all the architectural decisions in the teams, or if we look at this guild construct, the idea of a guild is a group of people who are all in product teams, right? So none of there's nobody in there whose sole job is to think about architecture or architecture strategy. But somebody has to think about this as well. So the idea here is maybe as a group, this could kind of condense from there. Because we don't want to be just in a completely reactive mode, right? So only talk about architecture when we have a specific problem to solve. We also want to look ahead a bit. Maybe we need the bigger change to not have all the small problems, right? Because maybe we took a sort of wrong turn at some point. Now we see a lot of challenges. If we had done a sort of if we pivot a little bit, or a bit more than a little bit, and do a bigger change at some point, maybe we lose a lot of these small challenges and actually get better. Or we have to be aware of changes in the market, right? Everything around us is still evolving. There are new services available every day on some cloud service. There is AI, what have you. So somebody has to sort of look at this and evaluate this and say, hey, this could actually be interesting for us. We don't want to miss out on opportunities. How do we organize this? What do they do? So the main forum is guild meetings. They just come together every once in a while and discuss and talk, right? Like a meetup. You still need somebody to organize this, right? Somebody to make sure this actually happens and to sort of moderate this and so on. We have a couple of staff engineers. I think this was also, sorry for using the term. I understand it's very ambiguous. In our organization, staff engineer basically means you're a very senior engineer and you're not assigned to a specific product team. You work across teams. So that kind of natural, that's like a role that is a natural candidate for organizing this cross-team effort. About decision-making, well, the idea is that they're mostly consensual, right? So we have a lot of decisions that don't even affect all the other teams. So maybe there's just a small group of teams, or maybe just one team affected. Of course, then they can mostly do what they want to do. For bigger decisions, there's usually a consensus. Maybe it takes some time to get there, and maybe there are some discussions. Maybe it's more of a sort of consent and then a real consensus in terms of I don't, disagree and commit. I don't really agree with the approach, but okay, let's go with that. So that works. We haven't really had a huge conflict where the CTO had to step in or so. And this also works because there is some alignment already, as I said, right? There is some architecture that we're quite happy with, and we could derive some principles from it that everybody's kind of aligned on. So this is the Guild approach. Let's compare this with a different approach we took in a different organization. Also completely different context, a very established company that is not still working on the first generation of the code, but on the 8th generation or so. I don't know, a lot of legacy there, really multiple generations of systems from, I'm not even going to, so it's less about conserving, it's more about transforming, right? So there's a bit more of an architecture drive here. We really want to change things. So we chose a different approach, an enabling team approach. If you haven't heard the term enabling team, I'm going to do a very quick digression. So enabling team, this term is from Team Topologies, a book that came out in 2019. I won't have the time to go into this any deeper, but it's super interesting. So if you haven't read the book, either read the book or just Google Team Topologies. There's a lot of content on the internet. It has really had quite the impact over the last 3 or 4 years. And the basic idea is to talk about software organizations, to reason about them and how they work and how flow works in our organization. Let's classify our teams and the interactions between teams. And we're going to classify our teams into 4 categories. We're going to have platform teams, complicated subsystem teams, stream-aligned teams, which are also the usual product teams or service teams that own a domain or subdomain, and enabling teams. And the different types of interactions, you can provide something as a service, right? So you have your service, your API is kind of, API is a product, you offer some API, other services use you provide something as a service, or maybe you collaborate very closely, maybe your service has some complicated subsystem and you collaborate closely with that team. And there's the facilitation mode, and this is where the enabling team comes in, right? So the idea of an enabling team is it's a dedicated team. They don't do anything else. They don't work on a product. Usually they don't produce any software, or let's say they're not part of your regular software delivery. Maybe they produce some tools, something you want to use internally, or checkers or linters, whatever, but they're not part of the product delivery. And they work with other teams. They are specialized and are ahead of the curve, as they say, of other teams in certain areas, so they can support them and coach them and facilitate learning there. So you could have a testing enabling team. When you say, okay, testing is something we don't want to have some sort of quality assurance at the end of the process. We want to shift it left. The teams are also responsible for the quality of their code and to do all the quality assurance. Now you have to check, do they actually have the capability to do this? Do they understand the tooling? Do they understand what they need to do, what's expected of them? How can you help them? What do they need? So there an enabling team would come in and would facilitate this learning. So enabling team facilitates, is an external team, is not part of your delivery, and has some sort of special knowledge. So we thought, let's do this for architecture. We're going to have a team of dedicated engineers. In this case, we actually called them architects, but they could be, staff engineers, principal engineers, you could call them whatever you want. If you feel the architecture term is a bit burned and there is some opposition to that. And the working mode, compared to the Guild, the working mode was a bit different, right? It was, rather than having just people in the teams coming together, now we have this dedicated team that would interact with the teams very, sort of in a very high frequency. So an important part is really identifying the capability gaps, right? If you move to a different architecture stack, of course it's easy, and the teams are eager to do so. They say, oh yeah, now we're going to build everything cloud native. Yay, I wanted to do this. Top minds, top challenges, right? But hey, maybe there are a lot of aspects they're not even aware of. Now suddenly there are, some examples, I think backup and restore, for example. Before that, they didn't really have to take care of that. Well, now Also, they don't really have to take care of that. There are mechanisms for that, but they have to understand how it works. It works differently. Authentication, authorization works differently. Well, let's say authentication works differently than before in their sort of monolithic world. A lot of communication patterns between services are now different because it was really quite the sort of isolated architecture with different services in completely different environments. And some things they relied on previously, maybe they couldn't rely on anymore, maybe they weren't even aware. So the architecture team would have check-ins with them, or the enabling team would have check-ins with them, and they would have loads of checklists and say, hey, do you know how to do this? Have you done this? Are you aware of this? And so on. If the teams struggled with that, they would coach them, or they would facilitate, maybe connect them with others to bridge this gap. Then, of course, provide assistance in building, so they could always come to them and ask them, and they will, of course, also coach the teams themselves, not only facilitate coaching by others or learning by others, but also help. Again, a lot of it is a big part of creating alignment is just, creating awareness, right? Just publishing the things, make sure the things are documented somewhere and in some digestible form and teachable form. So you can actually take, in onboarding, you can actually take people through and say, hey, these are our principles. Maybe have some cookbooks for everyday challenges. We say, hey, I'm going to start a new service and this service needs this, whatever. I need to communicate with X, with Kafka or so. And like, what's the cookbook for this? What are the steps I need to do? How do I create my topics? How do I manage the access control and so on? There are a lot of patterns that are repetitive and people can just look up, and somebody has to create this content, right? So content creation was a big part of this. Of course, what they also did, or what we also wanted to achieve there, is a bit of risk mitigation, right? Just make sure, just have an eye on things, right? Not take the decisions away from the teams, but if somebody really goes off some weird track, just make it visible. Let's make sure it's visible to the organization, and maybe we can intervene if we have to. If there's really like a big misunderstanding, maybe just have an eye on this, right? We trust the teams, but we don't want to trust blindly, right? We let them have their decisions, but we also want some transparency. They should also be vocal about their decisions so that others can intervene if they have to. And again, the strategic part. Of course, this team also had even then, of course, more capacity to do this. And part of this was to look ahead and see, hey, what could be big technology? Sorry, I'm going to take another. Technological is the word I was looking for. Technological opportunities we want to leverage. How did they work? I already mentioned a couple of these things, right? A lot of regular checkpoints with the teams, checklists, and so on. Get together with the team. What are you working on? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Even there will be a big kickoff for every new service where they would go through some things, and so it worked pretty well. Create documentation. So we had some portal where they would be the main contributors. Of course, also facilitate this. Other people, of course, can also contribute. It's also about just organizing things. Keep an eye on things, I already mentioned that, right? So there's some supervision, like just to have a basic level of risk mitigation. So there might be situations. It's still about consensus. Now in this construct, it's not so much about the consensus between all the different teams, between sort of the group, the guild. Now the consensus building is between the enabling team, like the architecture team, if you will, and the product team, right? So they have to reach a consensus there. They will also organize events, internal meetups, or a community of practice, if you will, where people would just show off things, or they would cover interesting topics, and even a yearly kind of internal company developer conference. And they maintained a tech radar. If you're not familiar with it, well, you can. I forgot to put in a slide with the tech radar. I think it was pioneered by ThoughtWorks, right? And the idea is you have blips. A certain technology would be a blip on a radar, and it's in different quadrants. It can be something you want to assess, or something that you want to try, or something that is approved, and you say, okay, this is a technology we like and we want to use, or something you don't want to use or want to phase out. So if you Google ThoughtWorks Tech Radar, you're going to find that. It's just also a nice, interesting way of creating some guidelines, what to use, and also to keep it dynamic and introduce new things. So they were the maintainers of that as well. Yeah, so I saw these two approaches. What were some observations I made that I want to share with you? I intend to. So this is independent of which form you choose. I think it's very important to create a culture of I intend to. So this has two aspects. One is, and this is the aspect that is, I think, featured in this book more. One is about not telling people what to do, but the people tell you what they're going to do. Right? So if you manage somebody, you don't tell them, hey, do this. But they say, hey, I intend to do this because of that and that. And then it's all good. Or maybe you say, oh, wait, that's a terrible idea. Maybe you want to argue with that. But the decision lies in the person doing the work again. And this has this part of not telling people what to do, and it has this other part of being vocal about things. Right? So if I want to do something, I tell others. I say, hey, I intend to build it this way. I intend to solve this problem this way. Again, to create this visibility and to give other people the chance to chime in. Either maybe they've made experiences with this, bad experiences, and they can tell you, hey, you haven't thought of this. This is going to fail because of X. Or maybe they've made good experiences with it, and they can say, hey, we've done the same thing. Hey, you can look at this code, you can use this, and this is how we did it. So just stimulate the conversation there. You don't want siloization, right? If you give the teams autonomy, and they're very focused on they have all these different inputs, right? Architecture is only like a marginal aspect of the work. They're also focused, of course, on product delivery and creating value and so on. Sometimes they're so focused on that they really start to get this tunnel vision, and they say, okay, we don't even want to talk about what we're doing, we just want to get it done. And this is something you want to avoid too, because then you create these silos, and you're going to end up in a very heterogeneous world where people reinvent the wheel and so on. So let people make their decisions, but let them be vocal about their decisions and open and transparent. This capability thing. So this is something where we already see differences between the two approaches, right? The intent to culture is important for both of them. With the enabling team structure, you make sure that you don't just dump things on teams, right? As I just said, architecture is just one aspect of all the work. They also have to deal with, well, actually delivering value, working on the product, but of course also with security, with ops, with testing, quality assurance, what have you, right? With all this shift left, a lot of responsibility has gone to the teams, and you can get into a mode where you just dump things on them. Or let's say you have to prevent doing that. Don't just dump things on the teams and say, hey, architecture, that's your responsibility too now, and how you do it, we don't care. If you give the teams responsibilities, you also have to support them, and you have to check if they have the capabilities, right? Do they know what they need to do, what's expected of them? Do they have the know-how? Do they need to be taught? Do they need trainings? Do they need more capacity to deal with this? If you have a closer eye on this with the enabling team, in the guild construct, yeah, this can happen. I think the danger is bigger here, that it's just dumped on the teams, and you don't really make sure they have the capabilities. I talked about the different contexts, right? In the guild context, it was more about conserving, so it kind of makes sense, right? You say, why have a dedicated team on architecture if I don't have an architecture drive, if you will, right? If I'm quite happy with the architecture I have, in the transformation scenario, of course that makes sense. It's much more important to have people pushing for things and explaining the new things to the teams if you're in a transformation thing, if you build things new. But I think this can also be a bit misleading, because are you really in a situation where your architecture is frozen? Is architecture not a continuous process? We talk about continuous improvement all the time, right? Of course, in our agile processes and the way we work, we want to continuously improve. And also architecture lives in a world that is ever-changing. As I said earlier, new opportunities come up every day, or new services are being offered, new technologies, new whatever. So you want to have an eye on this maybe, and maybe saying, okay, we have our architecture, it's really just about conserving it, can lead down a wrong road, right? Where you sort of really miss out on opportunities. So, we're nearing the end. So 3 learnings I took away from this experience, that I want to share with you. The first, a lot of architecture, a lot of literature about architecture management, a lot of discussions, also discussions we're going to have with senior management are about decisions. Who makes the architecture decisions? And it's so easy, especially with senior management and C-level, to get into a sort of what if. Oh yeah, sure, we trust the teams, let them make the decisions, but what if they make really, like, what if they do this? What if they just don't know what they're doing and they, you know, they do some crazy shit? Like, if you think about this, yeah, of course, what if, or what if everybody is sort of ill-intended and everybody just wants to sort of bankrupt the company and all the engineers are idiots anyway and don't understand what they're doing? Yeah, then okay, then you have a problem, right? But just having some central architect is not going to solve that. You have to build an organization where you can trust your teams, right? And I do, and I think, yeah, if you really cannot trust the teams at all, yeah, there are bigger problems anyway beyond architecture. So don't worry about all the decision-making stuff so much. People are going to have, you know, there's a peer group in place as well. There are other people. There's going to be at least a few reasonable people in your organization. So just make sure that they sort of know what's going on and then let the sort of the peer groups regulate this. No, there are so many other things to focus on. And I think something that's often neglected is who really drives architecture. If you just put it all to the teams and they do it sort of on the side, they're sort of all product engineers, but they also deal with architecture. Who really does the strategic decisions, or who really sort of does strategic drives? Who really brings in the big changes? Who focuses on the things that don't solve an immediate problem, but that introduce something completely new that you're maybe not doing, that you're not even doing at the moment, right? Maybe you want to introduce a whole new technology stack or so on. So I think this driving bit is really important. So what too long didn't read? What's the bottom line of all of this? If you have something that works for you, if you know exactly what works for you, that's fine. I'm not going to tell you to do something otherwise. If you think about, hey, this is really a challenge in our organization now, how are we going to deal with architecture? We want to give the responsibility to the teams. How do we create this alignment? I think this enabling team approach is great. So for me, it worked really well. I would say if you don't know what to do, then enabling team is probably good for you. And that's all I have to say for now. Happy to discuss this in the office hours.